Okay, here's the online module for COMM 101 Storytelling. I'm Professor Beth Bingham-Georges in the Department of Communications. Now, I feel pretty strongly that journalism is storytelling. Now, not all my colleagues agree with me on that, but I really believe that in order to engage our readers and viewers, that we need to tell them a story. Now, of course, it's not a made-up story. It's based on facts and a real event. But I'm going to walk through today in the online module my definition for storytelling as it relates to journalism and some mechanics that you can use in implementing that in your writing. Okay, so the idea of storytelling. Is journalism storytelling? Well, I'm certainly going to argue that it is. Now, good journalism uses conflict, characters, suspense, surprises, and makes an audience think or possibly feel something about the story. A lot of those same techniques that you learned way back in that literature class or some of your beginning writing classes are going to apply today in storytelling and journalism. But of course, again, they're not made up. They're not coming from our minds out of thin air. These are events that are taking place. We just need to be able to put them into a form, into a context that's going to make sense for our readers. Okay, if reporting was simply just the facts, it wouldn't be storytelling. For instance, what about reporting the facts about a presidential speech? Maybe if we were just reporting the facts, we would publish the unedited verbatim version of that particular speech. And I'm going to argue, of course, that's not storytelling. And most of our readers are not going to want to read that. We aren't putting it into context for them. What does the speech mean? How does it relate to prior speeches or to other things that this particular candidate might have said in other forums? Another example of reporting as just the facts. How about the California budget? Have you seen one? They're huge, right? Pages and pages of numbers. If we were to publish simply the budget as is, would that be storytelling? Of course not. It wouldn't even be a good story. It wouldn't even be good reporting because we wouldn't have any context to be able to put those numbers into. We don't know what they mean. So I'm going to argue that in order for us to have terrific journalism, terrific stories, we need to be able to engage the reader, and we're going to do that through storytelling. And the most important part, right down there at the bottom, I want you to remember that, outline it, highlight it, if you will, that journalists must put the story in context. That's what we do. That's what we get paid to do. Otherwise, it would be simply just the facts. Okay, that's all well and good, right? Stories, how do we turn reporting into stories, and how do we become a storyteller as a journalist? Let me give you some mechanics that you might be able to use when you get out there and you start writing your stories, some how-tos, if you will. Okay, the idea of focus. I talk a lot about this. I think it's important in our stories that we remain very, very focused. We don't have a lot of time, certainly not in TV news. We don't have a lot of space if we're writing for a newspaper. There's some exceptions if we're writing for the web, but most people who read a story on the web want to get to the gist of it right off the bat. So in order to make your report or your writing a story, I'm going to argue you're going to have to be very, very focused. Okay, find compelling characters. What does that mean? And I mean not made up characters. I'm talking about characters that have a relationship to your story, that have an investment with the story, not financial investment, but they're invested in the outcome or the mechanics or what's happening in that particular story. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But you choose the people you're going to interview for your story, so you should go out there and find those people who have something to say, who are invested in the story, who have an interest in the outcome, who are impacted by the story. Those are going to make some of the best characters. And remember, you don't have to always use the first, second, third person that you interview. Be selective. Find those people who can relate to the story. Find those people who are willing to share about the story, and then you're going to find those compelling characters. Okay, look for conflict. And this is the same kind of conflict that we've used in literature from, all the way back to Shakespeare. We see it in stories, novels like the Twilight series right now. Conflict, and there's a lot of different types of conflict, but it's the same for journalism and reporting. We're looking for that conflict. That's what makes the story interesting. So that conflict might be a person against a person. Okay, that would work. It might be a person against nature. Anytime we have a natural disaster, that's the kind of conflict we're looking at. It might be an internal conflict within the person we're talking to or the character. What are they struggling with? That right versus wrong, maybe that ethical decision. Those kind of stories are compelling. We want to look for that conflict. We want to bring that out in our story. Okay, the next element. We want to build surprises in our story. And again, it's not made up surprises, but it's surprises that reward the reader or the viewer for continuing with us. Okay, follow me on this one. And we're going to come back to this later in the semester because I think there's some techniques that we can use as we develop our writing further in building those surprises in a story. Don't you just love it when you're reading a novel and you're just totally engrossed in it, and all of a sudden there's a twist, and you go, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Or in a movie, when you've all along thought the good guy was a good guy, and he turns out to be on the other side. We love those kinds of surprises. I remember a few years back, one of my favorite TV reporters, Wayne Friedman, he's up at KGO in San Francisco. He did this amazing story about this man who was he was backing his car in a curvy country road, and he went off the side of the road into a deep ravine. Nobody knew he was there, but the dog that he had in the car with him, his dog, had gotten out of the car and run to some neighbors and had barked and barked and barked and barked, and it was like 12, 13 hours later that the neighbors finally figured out they better go find out what's going on, and they followed the dog to the ravine, and they found the man in the car at the bottom of the ravine. He was okay, but he might not have survived if the dog hadn't alerted the neighbors. Well, about 2/3 of the way through the story, there's this wonderful twist where we find out that the man at the bottom of the ravine had just adopted that dog the day before from the pound, had saved the dog, and then in turn the dog saved the man. Oh, those wonderful surprises. So we'll come back to that again, but remember, we don't always want to give away the story at the very beginning. Keep some of those surprises just as a way of rewarding your viewer for staying with you. I think it's important in our reporting that we define the beginning, the middle, and the end of our story. Especially so in TV news, that we want to have an image as our very opening shot. That's very, very powerful. And I would argue that the closing shot maybe even is more important. But we're going to build in the middle those elements that are going to support sort of our focus or our thesis of the particular story. So I want you to think about a beginning, middle, and end. How do I want to start the story? What are going to be the elements that are going to support sort of my idea, my focus? And then what do I want to end on? What do I want to leave my viewers with? So just like a novel, just like a play, just like good stories in other media, we're going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, and ending up this mechanics list, I'm going to say remember to stay focused. Again, bringing it full circle works oftentimes in journalism. So we introduce a problem, an issue at the very beginning. We walk through how it's impacting a particular person, and then we bring the story full circle by either solving the issue that we presented at the very beginning, or the person has come to grips with that particular situation or that conflict. So remember to stay focused. And I put this at the end again because I think oftentimes when we get into writing our stories on deadline, we have so many distractions. First of all, that's difficult. But we also have quotes from so many different people, and we have so many different ideas that we're trying to build into that story, trying to weave into that story, that we try to do too much. So I'm going to give you some ideas in the next module about how we can define that focus. But I think it's important as we start to get into the writing and we start editing our work to remember, stay focused. One issue. If we can synopsis or just shorten or summarize that focus into one sentence, that's going to work really well. Okay, that's all well and good. Let's talk about it, right? Let me show you some examples I think personally are excellent examples of storytelling. These are stories that some of them are several years old, but they have lingered in my mind ever since I read them, ever since I watched them. They have touched me in a way that have caused me to think about the world maybe a little bit differently and to remember these stories. The first one I just want to bring up, and I can't show you it, it's a newspaper story. I would strongly encourage you that you seek it out. I can show you how to do that in the library. One of the librarians can do that. But the LA Times did a series of articles called Enrique's Story. Enrique's Journey, I believe it was. In 2002, they won 2 Pulitzers for it. The writer won a Pulitzer and the photographer won a Pulitzer. It was an amazing example of storytelling. Let me give you the gist of it as you just look at these particular articles. But again, I strongly encourage you to seek it out and read it in its entirety. Okay, here's the gist of it. Thousands and thousands of children, teenagers, come into the United States illegally from Mexico and Central America looking for their parents. Okay. So that was the gist of the story, the idea. What the writer and the photographer did is they went down to the California-Mexico border. They actually caught up and found a character who was just compelling. His name was Enrique. His mother left him in Honduras with his sister and his aunt to come up to the United States to make money. They were very, very poor. She would send back money to her sister to take care of her kids. Enrique was 7 when she left. He's now a teenager. He hasn't seen his mom since. He decides to make this very dangerous journey to the United States, and he gets exported a couple of times back to Mexico as he's in the United States illegally. It is just an amazing story. And the way it was told through the characters, through the conflict, was just beautiful storytelling. It doesn't necessarily have a happy ending. It does end, though. It comes full circle in that Enrique now, as an older teen, has a child back in Honduras that he leaves behind as he decides to stay in the United States to be able to make a living and to send money back to his child. Okay, here's another story I kind of like. Okay, it's one of mine from when I was reporting, but I've always liked this story because it seemed so sort of ridiculous, if you will. And I hear as a parent, I hear this from other parents, that this idea of zero tolerance in our schools gets taken way too far, right? I was talking to another mother the other day who said her child, I think a 2nd grader or so, had an aspirin on him. He was caught with this aspirin and was suspended because the school has a zero tolerance for drugs. Okay. You see what I'm getting at, kind of ridiculous. So let's take a look at this particular story. I think it is an example of good storytelling in that, first of all, it stays very focused. We have pretty interesting characters, and we certainly beginning, middle, and end, and we bring it full circle as we talk about the conflict. So let's go ahead and look at this particular story, the zero tolerance for guns at schools.
Turn off the TV.
11-year-old Forrest Simpson feels the punishment did not fit the crime. He was sentenced to 1 day of detention. That means stuck inside the office, no recess, no lunch break, for possessing this toy gun at school. It was this very small plastic gun that got Forrest in trouble. The Concordia Elementary School 6th grader admits he knew weapons, including plastic guns, are forbidden at school. So why then did you have this gun if you knew it was against the rules?
Well, I mean, I didn't think that would get me in trouble.
As Forrest tells it, he found the toy on the playground. He says the teacher found it when it fell out of his pocket as he and a friend played. Forrest's mother isn't seeing eye to eye with school administrators on this one.
I think it's ridiculous, you know, because it's just like a piece of plastic. I mean, you can't even harm anybody with that if you wanted to. You know, it's dumb.
The school principal says the reason for the detention was not primarily because Forrest had a plastic gun. She says it was because of his threatening action against another student. Here's the school's version of what happened.
The student was in a classroom, jumped out of his seat, pulled something out of his pocket, held it to another student's head. That student didn't know if it was a finger, a pencil, a toy, a weapon, and he was frightened.
So Forrest was written up for failing to avoid action that was harmful to another individual. But the principal does admit just possessing the plastic toy would have been enough for her to investigate. Forrest's mother says that's going too far.
They're going a little bit overboard, you know, with everything. I mean, he got in trouble I think it was last year, for wearing white T-shirts. They thought he was starting a gang.
I would agree with Mrs. Simpson that times have changed, and the issues that we look at now are certainly different. But no, I think it's more important than ever to have consistent discipline policies at school.
Forrest isn't sure what all that stuff about consistent discipline policies means, but the one thing he is sure about is that he's learned an important lesson out of this.
Don't pick up anything that's on the floor.
In San Clemente, Beth Bingham, OCN. Here's the last story I want to show you. Wow, this one's powerful. In my opinion, maybe the most powerful of the three. It's called Heart of a Hero. It was an Edward R. Murrow winner for Best Feature a few years ago. It's done by, if I remember right, it's done by a reporter in the Seattle area. And this was a story that was done as sort of a follow-up to the original story. It is pretty emotional. It is about a young person, a 20-something who's killed. But I want you to take a look at the focus of the story, right? The focus doesn't have anything to do with this young person being killed. They've moved the story on. It also has a very clear beginning, middle, and end. It has conflict. It has heart and just emotion. But you know what I love most about this story are the surprises that are built in. So be aware of that as you watch it. There are times where it just sneaks up on you and you go, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Okay, let's take a look at that.
But I have lots of photos of my son. I found soccer pictures and everything, so yeah, he's right here. That's him. I found this picture and I went, oh, I love this. I just love this.
Out of all the pictures of Chris Keim, this one is his mom's favorite.
This is the picture we took. This is the day he came home from the hospital. It's an Instamatic. I found it. Look how tiny he was.
Look at the joy, the gift of life. That gift, 20 years later, is taken away when the night news cameras capture the Mardi Gras crowds erupting in violence. Chris Keim is carried away, beaten, unconscious. Within hours, he will die.
It's terrible. He didn't deserve it. It's not right at all. If we're trying to help somebody, this is what he gets. If we're trying to help somebody, it's not right.
I watched it on TV, and I was just incensed that this could happen in Seattle.
Rick Allison couldn't take his eyes off the television set.
And the police are there, and it still happens. I knew about Chris Keim.
That night, 1 year ago, Larry Levinson
I'm sitting there watching it.
learned about a young man
I watched him die.
trying to save a woman's life from the angry mob, someone he didn't even know.
How do you beat that?
Levinson calls Chris Keim a hero for what he did that night, for what he continues to do to this day.
The morning after the transplant, the doctor sat there, he put his hand on my foot and he says, "Ray, you received a kidney from a 20-year-old male that died of a head trauma." We went, "Chris, the kid that was in the news, it's got to be."
And it was.
It's about 8 inches long, right there. Yeah. The appendix goes there, kidney sets here. Jesse's is on her right side, mine's on the left.
Jesse
I didn't know how much longer I could go.
is Jesse Bettis, a Boeing worker who received Chris Keim's other kidney.
That first morning I woke up and they said, "It's working, you don't have to do dialysis." And I went, "Oh, yahoo!"
You're no longer a diabetic.
I'm no longer diabetic. I have a working pancreas.
Chris's pancreas. Martha French is an assistant attorney general who'd been a diabetic 25 years.
Well, it's pretty bad, all right.
Remember Rick? He'd been watching news coverage of the Mardi Gras riots. What we didn't tell you is that Rick was dying.
I'd be dead now.
If it wasn't for Chris Keim.
And in fact, they are. They're excellent lungs.
How do you know?
I breathe with them.
In the same hospital down the hall,
It's like a pretty good batch.
Larry Levinson had just about run out of time.
And the next morning, about 3 o'clock, one of my favorite nurses came bouncing in and said, "Do you love me?" And I said, "You know I do." And she said, "Well, how about a heart then?" I said, "I'll take it." How you guys doing? I woke up again this morning. I like.
Larry now has a heart of a hero.
I sure do. You bet.
And a new beginning. When Chris's mom first met Larry Levinson, she did what any mother would do.
And the first thing she wanted to do is listen to Chris's heart.
She put her ear to it.
A year later, tears have been replaced with laughter. Larry, Rick, Martha, Ray, and Jesse are now part of the Keim family.
They sure act like they're your family.
They're a great bunch of people. Yeah.
Who get together as often as they can
We do have a good time.
to remind each other why they're still alive.
We don't have
right.
to run past us anyway.
Left kidney, right kidney, pancreas, lungs, heart, and a wife.
And it's an incredible feeling, and to see them and how good they're doing and how healthy they are.
Thanks to a young man
How do you feel now?
Fantastic. Fantastic.
who left behind
This isn't just a lung or a set of lungs. These are Christopher Keim's lungs.
I'm doing great.
left behind something no one could take from him, even when someone took his life. That gift
I feel awesome. I guess in one word, that's the way I could explain it.
to help others live.
You've got to say that about living. It's very special.
I lived in England 7 years.
I know that he's looking down on us today. Just, you know, this is really cool.
In Seattle, John Sharifi, COMM 4 News.
So what'd you think? Pretty powerful, wasn't it? I think The Heart of the Hero is one of my favorite stories of all time. It really, I mean, it's emotional. It's got emotion, but it's certainly got very tight focus. It's about a legacy. It's about this young man's legacy as his life or his being continues to live on even after his death, as all of these recipients of his organs are doing so successful and living and being so healthy, right? And how wonderful that they can all come together with the parents who had that terrible tragedy of losing their son, right? But I love the way the reporter doesn't give it away at the very beginning. You know, he could have just said right at the very beginning, he could have said, you know, so-and-so has the heart of a hero, but he doesn't, right? It takes you a little bit, maybe a third of the way into the story before you really start to figure out what it's about. And boy, I mean, you get to the part where the heart recipient is talking to the mother. That really gets you, doesn't it? I just love that story. So let's go back through those mechanics of storytelling as we now relate them back to some examples that I think are very good examples of storytelling. So again, the idea of focus. Okay? Focus is not something that you're going to know before you've gone out into the field or before you've done your research. But once you sit down to write your story, you need to know what the focus is. You need to be able to define that focus in one sentence. I'm going to argue probably 3 words is going to be stronger, but that's going to come up in the next module. So define that focus. It's really not about, certainly in the heart of the hero story, about losing their son anymore. That might have been the focus of an earlier story. Or the senseless tragedy. It's not about that. It's about this young man's legacy lives on, right? So very, very focused. Compelling characters. Boy, we found some compelling characters in every one of those stories. Enrique. Oh my gosh, he is an amazing character. Now, the writer from the LA Times had to find Enrique. She knew that she wanted to do this particular story. And Enrique was not the first young person that she came across. So she had to be selective and find the right one who was going to illustrate the story, be open to her and allow her to tell the story through him, and also have a story to tell, right? When we look at the zero tolerance story, we're looking at the young school-age child. I mean, he's a character. Mom is certainly a character. But I love the character of the school administrator, too, right? I mean, she's so tough and serious. I could have possibly interviewed one of the teachers, but I chose the school administrator because she was a wonderful character on that other side of the story. And Heart of a Hero, every single person that is interviewed in that particular story is a wonderful character. So we get to choose those characters. It's not random. Looking for the conflict. What was the conflict in Enrique's journey? What was that conflict? Several different conflicts, right? I mean, we have the conflict of the whole issue of illegal immigration in this country. It's a big one, right? People definitely have a point of view when it comes to illegal immigration. What about the conflict of a mother in leaving her child behind? What do you do? If you can't make ends meet in your small town in Honduras and you know you can provide for your children in the United States, do you leave them? And the conflict within Enrique, the conflict of him feeling unwanted, but then yet repeating that cycle by deciding to stay in the United States, right? So look for the conflict within your story and develop that as you write your story. Build in surprises in your story. Heart of a Hero. We don't know that this young man who died donated all of his organs. We don't know that at the very beginning. We don't know that even his heart was donated to help somebody else live, right? It takes us a while to figure that out in the story. All of the stories have wonderful beginning, middles, and ends, right? And I like to argue that the ending is very important in our stories. Probably more so in television than in writing print, because we have traditionally written our print stories in inverted pyramid, and that generally means that we're going to cut off the bottom of the story if we don't have enough space. But if we can write a feature story that has a very powerful ending, it might be a great argument to not cut it, right? So I want you to think about that, at least knowing that you have a beginning, middle, and an end to your story, and again, staying focused. Okay, let's sum up a couple of thoughts from storytelling. Why do I feel so passionate about storytelling? Because we know that good stories linger in the reader's or viewer's mind, that these are stories that they can't forget. These are stories that they talk about around the water cooler that day. These are stories like me with Enrique's journey that I, hang on to, and I can remember that story vividly. I can remember where I read it. I can remember reading it. I couldn't wait to read the next article in this series because it was so compelling. Viewers remember how they feel long after they remember the facts. Right? And I love Al Tompkins. He's a longtime TV news reporter and producer. He has written a couple of books. He also teaches at the Poynter Institute in Florida. And one of the things he says is, great stories hang in the viewer's ear and catch the viewer's eye. Great stories aim straight for the viewer's heart. The best news stories don't just inform, they teach, illuminate, and inspire viewers. So I'm going to say good journalism. It can be interesting, it can be informative, it can be educational, compelling, and sometimes, once in a while, we can move people to take action, and that's pretty powerful. Okay, I'll see you next module.